So I'd like to acknowledge that we're, like the other comrades have said, that we're here on Wurrung country today and pay my respects to elders past and present. I think it's going to be very hard to follow that excellent act. But I'll sort of focus a bit more on Australia and other parts of the Asia and Pacific region. But we can certainly say that just as the comrades in Malaysia are experiencing, social solidarity is the only thing that can save us, and the attacks against us are just immense. They're raining down and it's just kind of incessant. So we're in a situation today where global warming is biting deep, and other aspects of the ecological crisis are underway. Things that have been warned about for the lifetimes of pretty much all of us are now a reality. Ecological disruptions underway, and our governments, whether you're in the global south where you might have had more of an awareness that the government isn't really on your side, or whether you're in the part of the global north where there's been enough slack in the system, enough of a social safety net that you might have been forgiven for a long time for thinking that there'd be government protections. I think more and more people in both global north and south are waking up to the fact that either we're on our own or we turn to one another, because the state, the capitalists, the bosses, none of them are interested in making sure that humanity gets through, that the biosphere gets through, that workers get through. We're all expendable in the incessant quest for profit. So I wanted to just kind of give a bit of a survey of what's going on in some of these different aspects of our social reality. 2022 has been, yet again, we've had an announcement by the WHO, oh look, 2022 was one of the world's hottest ever years. And each decade in the last 100 years, 120 years, each decade has been successively warmer, and the last decade is no exception. In 2022, the famine that has been looming in the Horn of Africa after 4 failed rainy seasons, 4 years of drought, it has reached the point where the WHO is warning that in this year, 2023, 222 million people face famine. And it's not just the drought, but the complex mix of war, conflict, and the global economic infrastructure that puts some countries at the bottom, others at the top. But even within those top countries, there's an immense inequality chasm between those who have and those who don't, those who live and those who can just die of, well, there's so many things to choose from. What are you going to die from? Is it going to be COVID? Is it going to be the cold, the heat, the blistering heat waves that, there's just like one piece of the apocalypse after the other. Last year, there was a blistering heat wave across Asia between March and May, which set records tumbling in India, in Pakistan, and in the Central Asian republics. It didn't make a lot of news in Australia. I found you had to be listening to Al Jazeera, reading Green Left, listening to BBC. It wasn't making the headlines that it should have, probably until Pakistan went underwater. The rest of the region, the water doesn't stop at any of the borders, but we probably mostly, and I include myself, mostly only heard of what happened in Pakistan when about different reports have said like a third of the country or a third of the population, so whichever it is, a third was underwater, and in recent reports only it's some of the waters are still yet to recede 6 months later. So there's been this stagnant water with people suffering from cholera, other waterborne diseases, and of course, because so many people's livelihoods depend on farming, both livelihoods have been impacted and also the food supply. The prices of food have gone up across Pakistan as if they weren't going up across the whole world already because of the, they say it's because of the war in Ukraine, and we know that that'll be responsible for some things, but we also know that the corporate profit gouges are in there, and if they see a chance to use an excuse to bump up prices, well, of course they will, and they do, and they have. So in January, so that was 2022. Just cut two things. And then at the end of the year in December, there was these crazy blizzards across the US with loss of life and storms like freezing storms even down to the Mexico border. And again, possibly cross the border. I'm sure the air currents didn't stop there. In January, a winter heat wave has broken records in the northern hemisphere, and you've got pictures of people out in their shorts and t-shirts in places that are normally minus 10, minus 20 degrees or something at this time of year. So here in Australia, we had the catastrophic summer from hell in 2019 and 2019-20, so that La Nina felt like a bit of a reprieve. And then there was the flooding that accompanied it. In some places there was flooding in 2021 and then all over again and more extensive in 2022. And the social and ecological impacts of that are still with us. So today the housing crisis, which was already, nothing was peachy in 2018. It wasn't, there was nothing perfect. There were huge waiting lists for public housing. Capitalism was running rampant and there were, lots of things going wrong. But since 2019, it's just been one thing after another. And the housing crisis is such that, the number of people who are couch surfing, who are in the streets, who are paying all of their, or the vast majority of their incomes in rent, is just rising and rising and rising. And none of that's to mention the COVID pandemic, which it has led on the one hand to, deaths and crisis in the hospital and health systems, and on the other, the draconian measures that were used to try to tackle it, affected people's livelihoods. And although in Australia and in some countries there was some social safety net, it didn't take very long for our lizard overlords, for the governments to decide that they would wind back on the social protections and try to get business as usual happen as soon as possible. And the result of that has been seen. I mean, I didn't draw up figures, but if you have a look at the waves of death across Australia, just for one example, we in 2020, the year that never ended, it seemed, when there were waves of death and hospitalisation, on a graph now, they just look like little blips, because it's not in the media anymore. No one's talking about, there's a bit of discourse about it, but it's not that front and centre every day, day after day after day. We're all thinking about, viruses and airborne diseases and, how much does a mask work or whatever. But there's been, in the last 1 year, there hasn't been a day where there have been fewer than 15 people die every day. And most recently it's around 40, and there's been a peak of around 80. And yeah, these waves just go on and on. But although the social measures, allowed them to make out like they were doing something, the time of border closures and so on was not used to recruit more nurses and allied health and doctors, and it was not used to improve salaries and make it more attractive so that we could get the hospital and healthcare services, in really hot shape, so that when the borders came down, when movement became unrestricted, and when inevitably the virus, the pandemic took hold again, even though no one talks about the pandemic anymore, none of that was prepared for. And so now the existing health system weaknesses, the existing health system inequality has just been revealed and exacerbated. So we've got climate disruption, we've got ecological disruption. There's the biodiversity. So it's not just global warming that is threatening the environment. There's like a bunch of different tipping points and different aspects of the ecology that are under threat, whether it's you're talking about clean water, pollution, nitrogen flows, phosphate pollution, carbon dioxide and global warming, and biodiversity. We're experiencing, the next wave of extinctions, like the extinctions that wiped out the dinosaurs. And and underneath all of this, capitalism is just keeping on going and making it all worse and failing to solve the problems. So instead, they're wasting the money and resources that we, as our comrades mentioned, the money and resources we so desperately need to solve these problems is being completely squandered by militarism. And in Australia, the shape that that's taking, we've had the ANZUS Treaty for a long time. The Australian military has been, connected to the US military for decades and decades. But in 2014, the Force Posture Agreement was signed, opening Northern Australia to US military bases. And so these are bases for war. There is a war against China that our government is preparing for, that the US is preparing for. They're beating the drums for this war. It's happening on so many fronts too. The propaganda barrage, they use any opportunity. So whether it was the pandemic or whether it's economic retaliation that China makes when Australia has a go at China, it's all used to raise the level of racism, raise the level of hostility, suspicion. We know that several years ago, most people didn't think that China was a bad actor or didn't trust China to, but now, thanks to several years of unrelenting propaganda preparing us for war, in Australia, people don't trust the Chinese government, and there is more willingness of people to prepare to be ready for war. And I would like to say that when or if the US makes a hot war with China, Australia would be dragged into it. But no, the Australian ruling class, they're just salivating over the prospect, and just with the projection to try to make Australia, join the group of the top 10 producers of military stuff. There's a good word for it. The Australian, the Australian ruling class, the capitalist class, wants to be the ones who create the military hardware for something like this, and they want to be integrated into the US war machine. And so the AUKUS deal, which came a couple of years ago, it's sort of the kind of the next step of integrating Australia into the US war machine, and it comes with a huge proliferation risk by involving, as part of being integrated into the US and UK war machine, by having this promise, I think of it more as a threat, to provide nuclear-powered submarines for the Australian military machine. This is if Australia does this, what's to stop any other country doing the same thing? It's another way of getting nukes by stealth through the back door. We're not supposed to have, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we're not supposed to have access to nuclear technology, but by being able to do it this way, it's the lid comes off, and it makes it possible for it to happen anywhere. And we've just, in the last year, the even just a nuclear powered electricity generating plant in the Ukraine, the way it's been at the centre of the war effort by by Russia in the Ukraine, taking over the Zaporizhia power plant, and the threat that this has posed to certainly Europe, but the rest of the world, if that thing is bombed. Why would anyone want to build another nuclear power plant, whether it's on a ship or anything else? Why would anyone want to do that? I know it's, we know it's not in the interests of working class people. It's not in the interests of the environment, and yet our government is wanting to be a part of it so that they can be part of the machine that beefs up the military power that supports the economic power of Australia and its biggest, its ally, the US. So there's a lot more we could say about this, and I haven't actually even talked about the people's resistance to it. I think in summary you could say, on the climate front, we're still kind of recovering from the impact of COVID closures and restrictions, that where in 2019 there was this rising wave of activism, it has re-emerged, and it is facing civil liberties attacks, where the New South Wales new laws are one example, and there are other state laws to suppress agitation and protest. And I think we can see more of this that we will expect to see as our side tries to find ways to mobilise, tries to find ways to respond to the threat of climate catastrophe, to the threat of the threat of war. We do face restrictions on our right to protest, yes, I think I am going to just. This is a kind of sloppy wind up, but I'm just going to do it and let us have more discussion about it.